Desperate in London this winter, rebellious Alia stumbles into a mysterious pub and has a one-night stand with a brooding man named Snape, pregnant and alone. She raises her child until a bag of magical gold appears with a note. For Andrew Snape, as she uncovers the truth. Alia realizes Snape is a wizard from a hidden world. A single mother-s struggle collides with magical secrets, and their child's existence threatens to unravel both realms. Can a Muggle survive a wizard's legacy? Chapter 1. London's winter was truly unpleasant. The damp, cold air and the incessant drizzle, which seemed as though it would never cease, made things particularly difficult for Alia Dashwood, who hadn't eaten a bite in over 20 hours. Tightening her damp clothes, she couldn't help but curse. Damn it! Trying to hop over a puddle, her legs went weak, and her frail body nearly sent her sprawling. She quickly grabbed a nearby lamppost, staggered to her feet, and leaned against it weakly, clutching her cramping, aching stomach. At this point, she would do anything for even a mouthful of food, or even just some hot water. Loud rock music blared from the record store next door, making Alia's head pound even harder. She pressed her hand to her forehead, the pain splitting. Her old injuries seemed to be flaring up, throbbing relentlessly. The day long so king had chilled her to the bone. She desperately needed a cup of hot water, or a bottle of whiskey. The thought of whiskey brought Alia's attention to an inconspicuous little pub, gray and dilapidated. It appeared almost ghostly through the curtain of rain. Squeezed between the record store and a bookstore, as if on the verge of disappearing, slapping her cheeks, she decided to try her luck inside. She was still fairly confident in herself. Even in her current disheveled state, a young, pretty face was a useful tool anywhere, wasn't it? Perhaps a kind gentleman would offer a soaked, pitiful lady a drink. Well, this didn't look like the sort of place a gentleman would frequent. Pushing open the door, Alia looked at the dark, dirty, smoke-filled space, the pungent smell of tobacco stinging her nose. She hesitated, but the warmth inside made it impossible to leave. Oh well, how much worse could things get? She certainly didn't want to go back out into the rain. Besides, she was hungry and cold. Even if there was nothing to eat, at least she could warm up here. Slowly stepping inside, as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Alia realized the place seemed to be hosting a costume party. The patrons were oddly dressed in long medieval-style cloaks, and some even wore pointed witch hats of the sort only seen in cartoons or fairy tale illustrations. Her own ordinary t-shirt and jeans suddenly seemed out of place. Her steps faltered. She felt uncertain. Could this be some strange religious gathering? "Hello there, esteemed lady. What can I get for you?" The bartender called out, raising an eyebrow at Alia. Alia hesitated. Her last penny had gone towards the subway ticket from the train station to the city center. Apart from the clothes on her back, she had nothing. She debated whether to brazenly ask for a free drink or find a gentleman willing to pay for her. Alia looked around. Everyone in the pub seemed peculiar. Besides their clothes, they were either in small groups drinking a beverage Alia had never seen before, or sitting alone in dark corners, seemingly trying to hide themselves in the shadows. Alia couldn't immediately find a suitable target to approach. Shaking her wet head, she banished the voice that kept nagging. "No, Alia, good girls don't do that." "It's too dangerous," she thought. "Shut up, Lynn. Humph, don't do what? If I don't do this, I'll freeze to death on the streets tonight. Instead of nagging, you should be helping me find someone with slightly less despicable character to take me in for the night." Alia sat at the bar, scanning the entire pub with her peripheral vision. No, not that one. His face was so dirty it looked like he hadn't washed it in a year. That one was all right looking, but his eyes were shifty. The typical look of a playboy. No, she didn't want any trouble. Suddenly, Alia's eyes lit up. She had found her target, smiling sweetly at the bartender. She walked without hesitation towards a man sitting on a sofa in the furthest corner of the bar. He was a young man with dark hair. In the dim light, he seemed to be about Alia's age. His long hair covered his cheeks, giving him a somewhat gloomy appearance. He sat alone in the corner, downing glass after glass of liquor. He was the only relatively normal-looking man she could find for the moment. More importantly, there was a bottle of whiskey in front of him, and he seemed rather drunk. "Hello, is this Sita-ken?" Alia asked in the sweet voice she usually used with friends at the bar. This voice, combined with Alia's pretty face, was usually irresistible. But today the man didn't even lift his eyes, seemingly oblivious to the living person beside him. Alia felt a pang of frustration, but life had long since taught her how to handle any awkward situation. After all, attending boarding school from the age of 4 and thriving in that environment had hardened her. Ignoring the man's coldness, she sat down next to the young fellow. Alia gave the bartender a sweet smile and asked for a glass. She picked up the whiskey bottle, refilled the man's glass, poured herself one, and clinked glasses with him. She giggled. "Terrible weather, isn't it? Is there a party here? I am Alia. What's your name?" The man finally acknowledged her presence. He lifted his head, his dark eyes sweeping over Alia with an annoyed, "Go away and leave me alone" expression. Whether it was from her damp clothes or something else, Alia suddenly shivered. Beautiful eyes like black pearls, she thought, remembering Sylvia's necklace, the one she had flaunted for so long. That black pearl necklace had allowed Sylvia to reign supreme at school for an entire semester, until after Christmas, when Alia managed to get her hands on a Hermes bag and a fur coat, reclaiming her own status. This man seemed exceptionally averse to strangers. She quickly downed her drink. Even if she got kicked out, at least she'd earned a free drink, right? After draining her glass, Alia noticed the dark-eyed man staring blankly at her neck and low-cut neckline. Alia smiled inwardly. She was well aware of her charm. Since the age of 14, she had never been rejected by men her age. She leaned closer to the man. His first reaction was to quickly dodge and forcefully shake off the hand Alia had placed on his arm. Ouch! Her hand hit the bar. It hurt. "What are you doing?" Alia scolded. Clutching her hand, the dark-eyed man seemed taken aback. He looked at Alia's hand, his lips pressed tightly together. His face devoid of apology. He slowly raised his head and gave Alia a dull, vicious glare. All right, I forgive you," Alia said, raising her hands in surrender. If she wasn't still relying on this man for shelter from the elements, she wouldn't bother dealing with this grumpy, seemingly difficult man. An idea sparked in her mind. Alia poured another glass of whiskey and offered it to the dark-eyed man. She didn't press close to him, but found a position that seemed intimate yet acceptable to someone with strong defenses. Propping her head up, she spoke softly, as if chatting with an old friend. "My name is Alia. I am from Manchester. London winters are awful, aren't they? It's already past New Year's, and it's still so damp and cold. The rain outside is freezing. It was always best to start a conversation with a stranger by talking about the weather." Under Alia's gentle voice, the dark-haired, dark-eyed man gradually relaxed, but he remained silent. His lips tightly closed as he drank steadily. Alia continued making small talk. She realized that even drunk, he was still very guarded. Whenever she asked about his background or identity, his hesias would fix on her with a frightening intensity. However, when she talked about herself or other things, he seemed to listen patiently. As Alia slowly chipped away at the man's defenses, she subtly studied him. He was tall and well-built, with broad shoulders and strong facial features. However, his lifestyle was clearly unhealthy, evidenced by his greasy hair and sallow complexion. He was cautious and extremely sensitive about his own information, suggesting either a naturally guarded personality or a profession that demanded secrecy. Even the most cautious and suspicious person wouldn't withhold their name, even a fake one, from a pretty girl in a bar. This likely meant his profession was special and required confidentiality. As she got closer, Alia smelled a faint bitterness on him, the scent of medicinal herbs. This meant he was likely a pharmacist or biological researcher for some secret department or research institute. You know Manchester is very different from London. The sunshine there is much better." Alia chatted while drinking, her mind racing. Good, stable profession, reclusive and not good at socializing, sloppy appearance. Most likely no girlfriend or wife, strong-willed and tolerant, having remained silent for so long. Even while drunk and under her charm offensive, yet not rejecting her company at this stage. Alia even noticed that the more optimistic she acted and the gentler her voice, the more relaxed his expression became. He even cracked a smile when she mentioned the shimmering river at her school and how they would lie on the grassy riverbank for their afternoon naps in the sunshine. His shoes were free of water ormond. Alia knew it had been raining in London for a week. Being in a pub at 2 in the afternoon with no signs of rain on his clothes or shoes could only mean he lived nearby. Excellent. Alia was very satisfied with her choice. She desperately needed temporary accommodation, just for one night. Once she got through tonight, she could start her job at the stationery company. While this was somewhat risky, it was preferable to spending another night huddled under a bridge with the homeless, as she had done last night. Now, all she needed to do was get this man to drink, the more the better, preferably until he was unconscious and passed out. As the empty bottles on the table piled up, the atmosphere between them grew more relaxed. The man even started giggling at Alia and no longer resisted her touch, or perhaps he simply lacked the strength to do so. When Alia leaned against his right arm, she clearly felt him trying to push her away, but his limbs were weak, and he wasn't as strong as her. "Are you dizzy?" Alia asked softly, gently massaging his temples as she spoke close to his ear. Watching him shake his head repeatedly. He mumbled, shaking his head like a child, trying to avoid her touch. All right, Alia said in a gentle, motherly tone, as if indulging a child's tantrum. "I won't touch you. You need to sleep now. Shall I take you home?" She helped the man up. He was taller than she had estimated, as she supported the staggering man. They looked like an intimate couple who had had too much to drink. Alia just prayed he had already paid his tab, or that the bartender knew him. Her luck held as they passed the bar. The bartender greeted them warmly. "Good night, Mr. Snape." He then winked at Alia knowingly. Alia gave the bartender a sweet smile and nodded, appearing calm while quickly guiding the man out of the pub. The rain was still falling, and it seemed to be getting heavier. The man's steps were unsteady, but he could still walk on his own. After realizing he didn't like her touching his right hand, but didn't mind his left, Alia walked on his left side, offering a supporting hand when he stumbled, but otherwise letting him find his own way. He had drunk several bottles of strong liquor. Could he even remember where he lived? Alia felt a twinge of worry, but her worry dissipated when they reached a small black house, and the man opened the door directly without a key. Alia followed him inside, too preoccupied to wipe the raindrops from her face. Her hand discreetly went to her back, where she held a gun she had taken from that jerk, Tall Joe, when she left. A girl traveling alone needed some means of self-specify, didn't she? "Hi, is this your place?" "It certainly." Alia kept her front facing the strange, drunken man, while taking in the house with her peripheral vision, momentarily at a loss for words. The floor was so dark she couldn't tell its original color. Upon entering, the small living room felt like a prison cell. Dim and gloomy, a sofa sat against one wall, behind which a bookcase stretched to the ceiling, crammed with books. The chandelier overhead was lit with candles. Apart from these, the living room was completely bare. Without even a table or a small chair, it felt cold and empty, as if no one had lived there for years. The curtains were tightly drawn, allowing no light other than the flickering candles to illuminate the room. Alia's left hand remained behind her back, gripping the gun tightly. She stood in the empty living room, watching as the man pushed open a door with a bang. Then she heard the sound of running water. Was he drinking water? He then stumbled back in, his face wet, and collapsed onto the dusty sofa, closing his eyes and falling unconscious. "Hey, Mr. Snape," Alia called out, remembering the bartender's address for him. She tiptoed closer, wanting to make sure he was truly asleep. If he wasn't, Alia wouldn't hesitate to give him another chop to the back of the neck. but as soon as she approached, his closed eyes snapped open. He raised a wooden stick he had somehow acquired and pointed it at Alia, snarling, "Go away. Go away. Stay away from me." Being threatened with a stick was almost comical, but the expression on Snape's face prevented Alia from laughing. The man possessed an inexplicably frightening aura. Alia obediently shrugged and slowly backed away. As she retreated to the staircase, putting some distance between them, he gradually relaxed but continued to point the toy stick at her. Alia's mind raced. She had noticed the staircase as soon as she entered, and had glimpsed 2 or 3 rooms upstairs. If possible, she would prefer to spend the night quietly in one of the upstairs rooms, far away from this man. As she gradually moved out of Mr. Snape's line of sight, through the gap in the staircase, Alia saw him close his eyes again and lean back on the sofa. The stick had vanished. She stifled a giggle. She had initially been worried about her safety with this man, but now she wasn't so concerned. After all, what was there to fear from a bookish man who played with little sticks? The upstairs was even worse than the living room. Alia grimaced at the thick layer of dust and the worm-eaten near collapsing bed. She even saw something moving within the mattress. "Ah!" she thought, quickly slamming the door shut, unwilling to recall the state of the other, even more dilapidated room. Oh well, one couldn't expect much from a bachelor's room, especially an untidy one, right? She recalled her first date with a boy in her year, how she had been horrified by the piles of trash in his apartment. Finally, she found a relatively decent room. Although it was still dusty, at least it had a relatively clean bed she could sleep in. Alia locked the door, then, as an afterthought, pushed the large desk by the bed against the door for added security. She rubbed her head. Although she had poured most of the alcohol at the bar into Snape, drinking little herself and discreetly pouring the rest away, she still felt slightly tipsy. The liquor there seemed stronger than usual. "Ah!" Clutching her throbbing head, she shook it and collapsed onto the bed, falling into a deep sleep. In the middle of the night, Alia curled up into a ball, shivering. The blanket offered no warmth whatsoever. She felt feverish and dizzy. Half asleep, she instinctively sought out a source of heat and seemed to find a warm body. Was it Joe? After that, Alia's memories became hazy. She vaguely remembered Joe returning when she was freezing, and she clung tightly to him. She was so cold. Chapter 2. Alia banged her head hard, crying out in regret. Then, unwilling to give up, she picked up the pregnancy test in her hand and carefully compared it to the instructions. No mistake, 2 lines. "God, help me!" Alia groaned, clutching her head as she sat on the toilet. "How is this possible? How? Just one night. Just once." How could she be pregnant? Oh, it seemed like more than once that night, right? No. This wasn't the time to think about that. Alia took out a new pregnancy test and tried again. The result was the same. Still pregnant. "Ah!" She pounded her head. Alia absolutely refused to admit that she was responsible for such a brainless act. To escape the rain, she had gone to the home of a drunken stranger. She had planned everything meticulously. Just stay one night and sneak away the next morning. She had even been prepared to knock the man unconscious, but the bookish fellow had lulled her into a false sense of security then. Then the man somehow entered the room, and it seemed like she had been the one to initiate it. The next morning, after waking up completely naked and staring wide-eyed at the equally unclothed man for a long while, she forced herself to remain calm while the man, named Snape, looked at her as if he'd seen a ghost. After dressing, she seemed to have said something like, "Wonderful night, wasn't it?" and even left a comforting kiss on the corner of the bookworm's mouth. After all, she had, well, that him, hadn't she? And judging by his stunned look, it seemed like it was his first time. This made Alia feel even more guilty. Slamming the door shut with a flourish, she ran off like a startled rabbit. Up to this point, things were still within her control. After all, Alia had thought that night was actually quite good. She clearly remembered thinking she needed to by the morning after pill. But strapped for cash, she reported to her new company. used some tricks to get a half-month salary advance from the finance department, rented a small place to live, and then had barely enough left for food. She couldn't even afford the bus to and from work and had to walk. On top of that, with her new job just starting, Alia was constantly busy. Her longest sleep during this period was 6 hours. The morning after pill, long forgotten. So. After realizing something was wrong with her body and finally having enough money to buy a pregnancy test, Alia received the news of her pregnancy. And if nothing unexpected happened, she was already 5 weeks along. "Oh God, what do I do? What do I do?" Alia cried, leaning against the bathroom wall, tears welling up, but refusing to fall. Then she abruptly looked up. Don't panic, Alia, don't panic. It's not certain. Yes, it's not certain yet. After all, the pregnancy test was one of those cheap £3 for 2 deals, wasn't it? It was very likely a faulty product. Yes, remember Susan's false alarm? Yes, it must be the same as Susan's. Just a false alarm, just a false alarm. Constantly reassuring herself, Alia felt much better. Calming down, she decided she still needed to go to the hospital. She had to confirm things before planning her next steps. She couldn't be like that fool Susan, who only knew how to hide in the dorm and cry. At the hospital, holding the doctor's report, Alia sat motionless on a bench, unable to think for a long time. It was too unexpected, this child. The doctor said it was already 5 weeks old and seemed to be developing well. The doctor said it was just a small embryo now, not yet formed. By the 8th week, it would start to take on a human shape with a large head. Then, she might even be able to hear the heartbeat. Covering her face, Alia felt lost and bewildered for the first time. She was always the most organized, the most rational Alia. Faced with more than 20 years of neglect from her parents, little Alia had managed to use her mother's guilt and her father's unwillingness to acknowledge her to secure the best treatment and material provisions. At boarding school, apart from some bullying when she was 4 or 5, she quickly adapted to the environment and grew up, forming her own small gang. Everyone, including the older students, dared not bully them. After graduating at 16, seeing that she was about to end up like other girls, either marrying someone or finding a job just to get by, Alia fought with all her might and got into university. Although it was a music academy that her parents looked down upon, from that point on, her father, who had always ignored her, slowly started to interact with her. Her mother, who had been prepared to cut off her living expenses at 16, generously gave her a sum of money. With improved finances, Alia also found a supporter and lover in a well-known young millionaire in Manchester, Big Joe. Those few years, Alia lived quite comfortably. However, after realizing that Big Joe's booming business was closely linked to Manchester's underworld, she knew she couldn't get involved in that trouble. So Alia reacted quickly, using tactics to make Big Joe disgusted with her. She slowly interfered in his work, making Joe, who preferred docile girls, gradually become annoyed. Then she staged a scene, deliberately making a big fuss in Joe's office. Alia got her wish. When Joe, covering the scratches Alia had left on his face, roared, "Get out! Get out of here!" Alia fought back a smile, covered her face with her hands, and ran to the train station, catching the next train from Manchester to London. Whether Joe regretted it or not, Alia didn't know. But she knew that Joe hadn't seen through her plan, because a week later, after learning that she had left Manchester for London penniless, Joe sent all her belongings to her through Susan, including the expensive jewelry and some stocks and bonds he had given her when he was happy. Not a single penny was missing. He even went to the university to help her with the necessary procedures, meaning that for her final year of university, Alia only needed to study independently, submit assignments and papers on time by mail, pass the exams, and she would smoothly receive her graduation certificate from the University of Manchester. Joe really didn't disappoint her. Difficulties and setbacks? Alia was never afraid to face them. Those little accidents were meant to be solved. But this child, The child slowly growing from an embryo into a human shape inside her belly couldn't be solved. Her original plan was to spend 7 or 8 years building her career, improving her competitiveness, and then finding someone from the upper middle class to marry when she was around 27 or 28. She wanted to buy a house in the suburbs, have a big garden, and raise 2 puppies. She would spend 3 to 4 years after marriage raising children and improving herself. She would never send her children to boarding school. She would nurture them carefully, give them all her love, maintain a good family, and let her children feel all the security and warmth that parents could provide. After the children started school, she would have the opportunity and time to do what she liked, play the piano, join a band, or go back to university for further studies. But this unexpected child disrupted all her plans. Walking slowly home, Alia lowered her head and thought carefully. Children, family, these were what she had always dreamed of. When she was little, every holiday, when her classmates excitedly went home, she would secretly find a hidden corner where no one could find her, waiting until everyone left before coming out. She had no home. Her dad hated her because, when she was little, strange things always happened around her. After her mother divorced her dad, she sent 4-year-old Alia to boarding school. At first, Alia could still go home and stay with her mother during Christmas and summer vacations, but at the age of 7, her mother successfully married an American real estate developer and left England, leaving Alia alone. Occasionally, during holidays, Alia would visit her mother and stepfather, but as she grew older and her mother had new children, she became reluctant to go. More often, she would do odd jobs for teachers or school staff. If it weren't for Lynn, Alia believed she wouldn't have been able to get through those difficult days. To a certain extent, Lynn had raised her. "What should I do, Lynn, a child? What should I do?" Alia stood at the hospital entrance, asking involuntarily. Then she remembered that Lynn had disappeared, vanished without a trace. She was alone again. She couldn't rely on Lynn anymore. She had grown up. She had to make a decision. The child was already 5 weeks old. If she was going to make a decision, she couldn't delay any longer. The longer she waited, the more harmful it would be to her body. Yes, Alia reaffirmed her decision. She had to have an abortion. She was only 20, if she decided now. The thing in her belly couldn't even be considered a child. It was just an embryo, a tiny embryo like a tadpole. Without even a brain, getting rid of it now was the best option. Her life had just gotten on track. This child would disrupt everything, and she couldn't afford to raise it. With it, she wouldn't be able to work, unless she sent it to boarding school. Do you want your child to relive your pain? You know how painful it is at boarding school. Do you want your child to go through that? But that's your own flesh and blood. Abortion, that's killing your child. You are an executioner, a murderer, and you are killing your own child. Alia suddenly shivered. She covered her face and crouched in the corner, sobbing, "Woo-woo!" For the next few days, Alia was absent-minded and restless. One moment she thought about decisively solving this problem, just like she had done before. But after making an appointment with the doctor and arriving at the hospital entrance, she hesitated again, running back to her apartment and burying herself under the covers, trembling and whimpering. Lynn, what should I do, Lynn?" Alia curled up into a ball under the covers, just like when she was a child. Whenever this happened, Lynn would always smile and pat her, saying she was a silkworm. Unfortunately, no one answered her cries anymore. Lynn was gone. If Lynn were here, she would definitely tell her to keep the child, Alia thought, huddled in bed. Lynn often whispered in her ear that when Alia grew up, she should find a good man to marry and have a few babies, as many as she wanted. She wouldn't have to worry about not having anyone to take care of them. Lynn said she could help Alia with the children. Alia imagined a group of children being disciplined by a strict Lynn, and she chuckled, but then she frowned again. If the child was born, how would she raise it? She was only in her early 20s. What would she do with the rest of her life? And if she gave birth to this child, it would be a bastard, an illegitimate child with an unknown father. Didn't she know what would happen to a child without a father? Alia, think about Susan. Didn't she know the tragic life Susan had endured? Alia said to herself. Susan arrived at Alia's school when she was 10. Having previously lived in a children's home run by a social charity in London's East End, Susan was born without a father and was raised by her grandmother. As soon as she could walk, her mother sent her to the children's home. Even though it was full of poor children, there was still a hierarchy. Children like Susan, without fathers, were at the very bottom. The teachers strictly managed the children. Older children bullied younger children, and younger children bullied even weaker children. Later, Susan told Alia that she never let her mother send her extra things because she couldn't use them. They would be snatched away as soon as she entered the door. Winters were always cold because, to save money, the teachers only fired up the boiler on Mondays. The clothes were donated too big and let the wind in winter. Her hands and feet were covered in chill blains. It wasn't until Susan's mother found a stable job at Alia's boarding school, and the nearby village school offered Susan a place that she escaped from there. Susan once happily told Alia that she had never been so warm and happy, even though her living quarters were in the boiler room, a place Alia and Sylvia and other students would never go. Material hardship was only one aspect. The first time Alia met Susan, she felt like she was a frozen quail, burying her head in her wings and shivering. At that time, Sylvia and a group of girls surrounded Susan in the stairwell, maliciously asking her loudly, "Hey, what's your last name? Has your mom, who's always crawling on the floor, found your black dad yet? Ha, Susan, your mom will take anyone. Huh? Ah, a bastard, and a black one at that. Ha." Despite such insulting words, Susan kept her head down and didn't say a word, curling up into a ball and letting Sylvia's followers bully her. Seeing the insults becoming increasingly unbearable, Alia couldn't help but step forward and stop them, once again making an enemy of Sylvia. Susan was then taken into Alia's small group. Later, when Alia asked Susan why she didn't fight back, Susan's answer surprised her. She said flatly, "I am a bastard. Everyone says so. And my mom doesn't even know who my dad is." That matter of factness, that numbness, still shocked Alia to this day. So, let her own child suffer that kind of pain? Alia covered her face in anguish. No, she couldn't. For the next few days, Alia kept thinking about what Lynn would tell her to do if she were here, thinking about her future plans. She still couldn't make up her mind, even though she listed countless reasons. Telling herself that keeping the child at this stage was not a good choice, that she was too young to take on a child. The thought of killing her own child made Alia's stomach churn and ache fiercely. She longed for a child connected to her by blood. She had never experienced the kind of family warmth that ordinary people could easily obtain. She had been planning to build a stable and warm family for herself since she was 13. Lynn had laughed and said she was precocious. The child, although it had come a little early, it had come, hadn't it? From now on, she would no longer be alone. Even if Lynn suddenly disappeared one day, she would have family. A relative connected to her by blood, wouldn't she? Chapter 3. 3 weeks later, Alia appeared punctually in the hospital's prenatal examination room, listening to the faint thump-thump of the heartbeat transmitted through the instrument placed on her belly. Alia suddenly felt her empty heart fill. At that moment, tears streamed down her face. Jester, she had decided to keep the child. She had to rearrange her life, just like Lynn had taught her. Once you make a decision, act on it, don't regret it. Before, at the company, Alia had always worked tirelessly for her performance, overtime being a common occurrence. But now, everything was for the baby. She tried to reduce her workload as much as possible, arriving and leaving work on time every day, and increasing her food budget. To save money, Alia could live on potatoes for a week, but now that wouldn't do. She had to eat for the baby. Fortunately, her company was near a vegetable distribution center that supplied supermarkets. 2 packs of cigarettes and a bottle of brandy successfully gained Alia entry to the center with her employee ID, where she could surreptitiously select subpar vegetables that couldn't be sold in supermarkets. Every week, Alia would also go to the docks where there were fresh and inexpensive seafood products. She couldn't afford steak, but she needed meat. She had to be well nourished for staples like bread. Alia bought flour and made it herself whenever she could, which was both healthy and economical. But even so, her life was still rather tight. It wasn't that her salary wasn't enough, but the money she saved each month wouldn't cover her living expenses during maternity and breastfeeding. After careful calculation, Alia decided that when she went back to school to complete her departure procedures and collect her university diploma, she would also sell the stocks and bonds Big Joe had given her. Joe's company was doing well, and the price should be good. Alia estimated it would be around £30,000. This money, along with the various investments she had made under Lynn's guidance during university and her savings, should be enough to last until the baby was about a year old. After handling these matters and returning to London, the first thing Alia did was sell all the jewelry Joe had given her. Following Lynn's financial advice, she invested all the cash from the sale into the financial market. Since Alia was a child, Lynn had begun teaching her about finance. When Alia turned 15, she started having her invest in the stock market. Stocks are unstable, but they bring in quick money, Lynn had said at the time. She had Alia, who was unfamiliar with finance at the time, memorize certain stocks and told her which ones to hold long-term and which ones to trade short-term. So, in university, while other students were broke or even in debt, Alia had become a little rich woman, albeit secretly. As the weather grew hotter, Alia's belly grew larger. Once even her loosest clothes couldn't conceal it. Alia noticed the whispers behind her back at the company increasing. At first, she ignored the gossip. People were like that. They always stared at things or people that were different. Alia had experienced this all her life. When she decided to keep the baby, she had prepared herself mentally. Besides, she wasn't completely alone at the company. From the day she started, Alia had consciously cultivated a few friendships, just like she had done at boarding school. A sweet appearance and elegant demeanor always helped her gain a few deep friendships, like with Charles and Liz. Alia. Early one morning, as soon as Alia entered the company, Liz, the general manager's secretary, reached out to Alia with a thick stack of documents, her expression mysterious, beckoning her over. Seeing Liz's demeanor, Alia guessed she had some news, and that it was closely related to her. The two quickly headed for the stairwell, avoiding the crowd. Seeing no one around, Liz was about to close the fire door when Alia opened it fully, raised an eyebrow at Liz, patted her bulging belly, and said playfully, "He needs oxygen." It's a boy." Liz's attention was successfully diverted. She reverently touched Alia's belly and said with delight, "Yes, the doctor told me yesterday during the checkup. Isn't it wonderful?" Lowering her head and gently stroking her belly. A maternal tenderness spread across Alia's beautiful and striking face. Liz couldn't help but smile along with Alia, but her expression quickly turned serious. Thinking about the news she had to deliver, she didn't know how to say it. Alia saw that the news Liz brought was probably not good. She encouraged Liz with her eyes, signaling her to speak, indicating that it was okay, she could handle it. Liz looked over her shoulder to make sure no one was paying attention. She leaned close to Alia and whispered, "Yesterday afternoon, the boss talked with HR." She paused, trying to find the right words, but there was no way to soften the blow, so she just blurted it out. "I overheard the general manager telling HR to find a way to make you resign. The company doesn't want to carry an employee who can't work for over a year and still has to be paid, but they can't initiate it, so they can only force you to resign, Alia. You have to be careful recently." Alia's heart sank. As she had feared, the worst had happened. Although the law stipulated that pregnant women couldn't be fired, many small companies, to save money or reduce burdens, often found ways to make pregnant employees resign. After thanking Liz for the information, Alia hid herself in the shadows of the stairwell, leaning against the wall quietly. The darkness helped her think. Alia thought of Charles, who worked as an assistant in HR, and decided to go chat with him now and finalize their dinner plans for 2 days later. The boss had probably made up his mind, but before the final decision was announced, Alia wanted to fight for the best possible outcome. Charles was a sensitive soul. He liked collecting Barbie dolls, with blonde, blue-eyed ones being his favorite. So when Alia, blonde, blue-eyed, and with skin so smooth it seemed poreless, joined the company, Charles had shown great interest in her. Alia naturally wouldn't refuse a friendship. Dinner was great, especially the dessert, which both Alia and Charles raved about. They exchanged information freely. Charles told Alia that his superior had hinted at transferring Alia from the most profitable and highest-paying sales department. Currently, there were 3 vacancies in the company, one at the reception desk, one at a warehouse some distance from the company that needed a warehouse manager, and one in the finance department, which lacked a tax officer. Of the 3 positions, the warehouse manager position not only had a low salary, but also a poor working environment, making it the least desirable. The tax officer position was in a core department, and while the salary was high, it required relevant qualifications, and many people had been eyeing the position since the previous tax officer left in May. In Charles' opinion, his supervisor most likely wanted to place Alia at the reception desk. The salary wasn't as high as her current one, but at least the work would be easier. Just answering phones and passing on documents. Besides, Alia was beautiful, even pregnant. She was a beautiful, pregnant woman, and she would be a good face for the company. Hearing Charles' words, Alia breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed Mr. House, Charles' superior, wasn't trying to kick her out like the boss. He had still left her some options. Otherwise, he would have directly assigned her to the warehouse. Thank God, thanked the kind Mr. House. However, Alia didn't want to be a mere decoration. Since there was a more promising vacancy, why not aim for the best? What? Charles was so startled that he didn't even notice the soup dripping from his spoon. He widened his eyes as if he didn't recognize the person in front of him and raised his voice. You want to join the finance department? Oh, darling, be quiet. Alia quickly apologized with a smile to the people at the neighboring tables who had been disturbed. If it weren't for the table between them, Charles would have almost jumped on Alia. He threw down his spoon and asked in a low voice, Are you sure? That's the finance department. You need certificates and qualifications for that. Oh, I know, dear Charles. I certainly know what the finance department requires. But how do you know I don't have them? Not all blonde. Blue-eyed girls hate studying. I happen to be quite good at math. She winked playfully at Charles. Oh, Charles reacted, sat up straight, pointed at Alia, and let out a knowing sigh. Cunning girl, but I like it. You know, I am quite smitten with you. Darling, I like ambitious girls, especially ones as beautiful as you. Really, darling? Then your Robert will be heartbroken. Alia slowly took a bite of cake, smiling seductively at Charles. Robert was Charles' boyfriend. Faced with Alia's smile, Charles clutched his chest dramatically and exclaimed, Oh God, what should I do? I feel like my heart has been stolen. Oh dear Robert, forgive me. The other half of my heart is still yours. Alia, clutching her belly, laughed heartily with Charles. Oh beautiful angel, for the sake of the little one in your belly, I can do you another small favor. Charles swirled his wine glass slowly and said unhurriedly, Alia raised an eyebrow and asked, Mrs. House is also pregnant. Every other day, as long as the weather is nice, she goes for a walk in Regent's Park. Good luck, clever blonde. Charles winked at Alia and raised his glass in a toast. They clinked glasses knowingly. Alia had spotted Sylvia's minion, that girl named Sally, in Charles's eyes. She was a clever girl, good at gathering all sorts of information. She didn't just provide this information to Sylvia. As long as the price was right, she would provide it to anyone. Alia had bought information from Sally several times behind Sylvia's back to avoid Sylvia's retaliation. Alia wasn't sure what Charles needed from her yet, but since he could provide her with various pieces of information and small favors that didn't harm his own interests. There must be something about her that Charles valued. All Alia could do was wait. The weekend sun was exceptionally bright, even a little hot, but Alia didn't mind. She went out wearing only a sun hat. Sunlight was particularly precious in England, wasn't it? Regent's Park was large, but Alia found the group of pregnant women where Mrs. House was without any trouble. Charles had shown her a picture of Mrs. House. Like Alia, she had blonde hair and some freckles, with a few new ones appearing due to the pregnancy. She sat with a group of pregnant women, watching the children playing nearby, occasionally letting out hearty laughs. She seemed to have a cheerful personality. Alia didn't rush over. She walked along the path in front of the group of pregnant women, maintaining a steady pace, one hand supporting her lower back. Strolling leisurely, as she passed Mrs. House's group, she made eye contact with a redhead. Alia's lips curved into a smile as she nodded politely at the group of women with their prominent bellies. The redhead glanced at Alia's large belly, smiled back, and then turned to talk to the woman next to her. Alia continued walking, turning onto a shady path. She took out a tissue from her bag and wiped the sweat from her brow, then gazed at the children playing in the sandbox in the distance, watching their childish games with interest, occasionally covering her mouth with a melodious chuckle. She stayed in the park for quite a while. After that brief encounter from afar, she didn't approach Mrs. House again. However, as she was about to leave, she happened to run into Mrs. House with her 2 children and her pregnant belly, buying ice cream for them at the park exit. Alia walked over, stood next to Mrs. House and her children, and pulled out some money. "I'd like a lemon ice cream." "Please." "Oh, I saw you earlier. Were you taking a walk in the park too?" Alia heard a warm voice beside her. She smiled, looking at Mrs. House with a surprised expression, as if a little flustered. "Oh, yes, yes. And you are?" "Over by the sandbox earlier, remember. There were several of us. You even said hello to Elizabeth," Mrs. House said cheerfully. "Oh," Alia said with a look of sudden understanding. Right, I remember now. Oh, so her name is Elizabeth. Her hair is so beautiful, isn't it? I couldn't help but look. I've always dreamed of having beautiful red hair, like Anne of Green Gables. I hope she didn't mind." "Of course not. She'd be thrilled to hear that. Elizabeth is very proud of her red hair. How far along are you?" "We seem to be about the same." Mrs. House stroked her belly. 25 weeks. The doctor recommended I get out and walk more. It's good for the baby." "Oh, right. At this stage you should walk more. It'll give you strength. An hour a day is enough. Preferably when the sun is setting, so it's not too hot. Oh, I hope you don't mind." Mrs. House seemed to realize she was being a bit nosy and quickly apologized. "Not at all." Alia quickly waved her hand. "Of course not. I'd love for you to tell me more. This is my first pregnancy, and I am inexperienced with a lot of things. I am always worried I'll do something wrong. I am so grateful for your advice. Is this your daughter? What a beautiful little girl." The two chatted happily. By the time they parted, they had agreed to walk together the day after tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thanks to Mrs. House's introduction, Alia officially joined the park's pregnant women's group. As they were all pregnant, their conversations mostly revolved around their babies in their bellies or their children who were already growing up. Putting aside work matters, Alia found herself benefiting greatly just from chatting with Mrs. House and the others. Being pregnant for the first time, even for a rational young woman in her early 20s, it was hard not to feel lost. While most women experienced months of morning sickness, Alia only had it for a week. So initially, she had been quite optimistic about her pregnancy. Later, as the baby grew bigger and started moving inside her, Alia found it all fascinating, but along with the fascination came fear. She was alone. No one had ever guided her through pregnancy, what to expect each month. All her knowledge came from books she had read in the past few months. One time, the baby moved so much that her stomach hurt for a long time, scaring her so much that she sat frozen in her chair. Not daring to move, only after staring at her belly for an hour did she dare to move again. Then there were a few days when the usually active baby suddenly stopped moving, and she felt a throbbing pain. Alia was terrified and cried alone in her small bedroom. She waited anxiously until Monday, quickly took a leave of absence, and rushed to the hospital. Only after the doctor told her that the baby was fine did she finally relax. Now, with the practical guidance from the others, several of the women had given birth multiple times, Alia applied herself with the same dedication she had shown in school, even carrying a notebook to jot down important points. When these women learned that Alia lived alone, they advised her to pack her things in advance and go to the hospital early, even if it meant staying a few extra days rather than being home alone. It was too dangerous. When they found out she planned to work until October before taking maternity leave, they all scolded her. Alia's due date was around the 15th of October. Her original plan was to take leave 2 weeks early, which she thought would be sufficient. However, after hearing about premature births and early deliveries, Alia became apprehensive, and her previously surging career ambitions subsided. After all, the baby was the most important thing, wasn't it? In the end, Alia decided to accept the company's transfer to the reception desk. The finance department job required frequent travel and overtime. She could probably push herself to continue working. But what if the baby didn't agree? Her friendship with Mrs. House hadn't been in vain. During a dinner with Elizabeth and her husband at Mrs. House's invitation, Alia discovered with surprise that Mr. House was her colleague. Mrs. House sang Alia's praises, so after the transfer, Alia found that her salary remained the same as when she was in the sales department, not reduced at all. Apparently, it was because Alia was still a sales department employee, just temporarily assigned to the reception desk. She didn't know what Mr. House had said to the boss, but after Alia started working at the reception desk, Mr. House secretly told her not to worry about her salary during maternity leave. Everything will be in accordance with the relevant legal provisions, were his exact words. At that moment, Alia finally breathed a sigh of relief. As long as she had income during her year of maternity leave, everything would be fine. Although she didn't have to worry about herself and the baby going hungry, raising a child alone would always be financially challenging. Chapter 4. Alia often found herself staring down at her large belly, lost in thought. She was struggling with a decision, even more so than when she'd first decided to keep the baby. Should she tell the child's father about his existence? Alia had been pondering this question from the moment she discovered she was pregnant, right up until the imminent arrival of the child, still without a resolution. Several times she'd made up her mind, clutching a written letter, ready to drop it in the mailbox, but hesitation always gripped her, and she'd return home, letter in hand. What should she do? Should she tell the child's father? The thought of Lynn sent a pang of pain through Alia's heart. If Lynn were here, what advice would she give? She would definitely tell Alia to inform the father. As long as he's a decent, honest person, at least your financial burden will be lighter, Lynn would undoubtedly say. Lynn often viewed things from a practical perspective, something she referred to as reality. She always said Alia was too naive, too idealistic. Telling him was the right thing to do. Alia's logic told her. He was the child's father, after all. He had a right to know. But emotionally, Alia couldn't accept a stranger becoming her child's father, even if it was the truth. The child was hers alone. This was the understanding she'd reached from the beginning. She would give birth to him and raise him by herself. Furthermore, what if that Snape didn't accept the child? The initial intention of finding the father was to have someone else to love the child. But that man didn't seem capable of loving anyone. Oh dear, Leah. What if you tell him, and he tries to take your baby away? Susan fretted. Dear Susan, ever since learning about Alia's pregnancy, had been clamoring to visit. Now she had even resigned from her job in Manchester and moved to London, finding a job as a sales clerk near Alia's home, all to take care of Alia during her final months. Take the child. Ha! Alia wasn't worried about that. If that nerdy Snape dared to entertain such a thought, Alia swore she had ways to make him regret ever being born. Susan, well aware of Alia's methods, propped her chin in her hand and nodded. True, just think about what happened to Simon. He was so scared he hid in the hospital, afraid to come out. He ran like a rabbit every time he saw you. Ts scanned Big George. He asked me about you when I came to London. I chased him off with a frying pan. Simon was Susan's ex-boyfriend who had gotten her pregnant when she was underage. Alia had made sure he learned the meaning of a man's responsibility. Ha, Alia chuckled, picturing the usually pompous George being chased down the street by Susan wielding a frying pan. Perhaps I really should tell him. I mean, the baby's father? Alia lay beside Susan, hesitantly asking. Well, I think if you are not worried about him trying to take the baby, you can definitely tell him. The worst that can happen is he ignores the child, which is no different from the current situation. But if he has even a sliver of responsibility, it means one more person to love the child. Besides, what if Andrew wants a dad one day? Andrew was the name Alia and Susan had chosen for the unborn child. Susan crunched on an apple, lying flat on the bed with Alia, and continued, If one day he wants to know who his real father is, at least you can bring this man to meet Andrew and tell him, Son, this is your dad, instead of saying, I don't know. Alia patted Susan's hand sympathetically, remembering Susan's childhood experiences and feeling a pang of sadness for her. It's okay, Alia, I am over it, Susan said, looking at the ceiling, seemingly unconcerned. Lying in bed that night, Alia thought about Susan's words. Yes, she didn't need this Mr. Snape, but what if her child did? If one day her child asked, Mom, who is my dad? She couldn't just tell him, Oh, honey, Mommy doesn't know his name or what kind of person he is. Mommy only knows his last name is Snape. The next day was Saturday, but Alia woke up early. She sat at her desk and wrote a letter, carefully checking her wording several times. Once satisfied, she addressed the envelope to Mr. Snape, 19 Spinner's End, and then, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders as if she had resolved a long-standing issue, she dragged a yawning Susan off to enjoy a delicious breakfast at their favorite cafe, 2 blocks away. That evening, Severus Snape returned to Spinner's End. His recent meeting with Dumbledore had left him in a particularly foul mood. Many people called Dumbledore the kindest old man in the wizarding world. Severus Snape wanted to shout, Bullshit! At such claims. Kind? Dumbledore? Ha! In Severus Snape's opinion, Dumbledore was no better than the Dark Lord, and sometimes Dumbledore was even more daunting. Sinking wearily onto the sofa, Severus Snape tapped his fingers against the armrest, replaying the day's events in his mind. He hadn't made any mistakes. The Dark Lord hadn't suspected a thing, and had even praised him at the meeting, causing Bellatrix Lestrange, that madwoman, to glare at him even more fiercely. Idiot! The thought of Bellatrix's predatory gaze filled Severus Snape with disdain. Such a fool was the Dark Lord's favorite? Severus Snape's mood improved slightly. After all, gaining the trust of both Dumbledore and the Dark Lord, and securing a teaching position at Hot Form was no small feat. The thought of returning to Hot Form in a month, his first true home, lifted his spirits further. Despite some unpleasant memories, his years at Hot Form had been the best of his short 20-odd years of life. There were at least a few fragments worth cherishing, weren't there? The potions classroom where he'd lost himself in his work, the vast library, the lawns he'd strolled across with Lily. These pleasant memories brought a warm smile to the face of the otherwise gloomy young man. Severus Snape was preparing for bed. That morning he'd been summoned by the Dark Lord to meet with that old fox Dumbledore at Hotgoes, who hadn't let him live until he'd extracted every bit of information he had about the Death Eaters. Then he'd spent the afternoon flattering the Dark Lord and participating in those sickening games. He was exhausted. As he was about to head upstairs, he spotted a letter lying on the doormat. A letter, the doors and windows were locked. An owl couldn't have gotten in. Severus Snape quickly cast a series of spells with his wand. Nothing happened. It was just a letter, an ordinary letter. Could a Muggle postman have delivered it? With a flick of his wand, the letter flew into his hand. The envelope bore elegant handwriting, addressed to him at his address. He opened it. A single page contained only a few lines, but those lines completely stunned Severus Snape, current Death Eater. Order of the Phoenix Spy, and soon to be Hotspain, youngest professor and head of house. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Snape, do you remember me? My name is Alia. Sometime after New Year's, around January, you and I, we spent a very wonderful and memorable night at your home, 19 Spinner's End. Yes, very memorable, because that night, God and you gave me a very precious gift. Yes, a little baby. His name is Andrew. He's a boy. Although he hasn't been born yet. I don't think I'll have to wait much longer, will I? I feel obligated to inform you of this, as without you, there would be no Andrew. However, you needn't worry. I have absolutely no intention of disturbing your life. I don't expect you to take any responsibility. I am writing this letter mainly to ask if you could tell me your full name or any other information, so that if one day Andrew asks me, who is my dad, I can responsibly and honestly tell him about you, rather than fabricating a non-existent person. That wouldn't be good for his development. I look forward to your reply. Of course, if this is inconvenient for you, please pretend you never saw this letter. Sincerely, Alia." It took a while for Severus Snape to recover. He quickly unfolded the letter he'd crumpled into a ball, reading it again, word by word, letter by letter, making sure he hadn't misunderstood. He read it again and again. No, he hadn't misunderstood. That woman from that night was pregnant with his child, and the child's name was Andrew or Alia, right, Alia? The name of that woman who had somehow ended up in bed with him. Anyone waking up drunk to find a woman in their bed, both of them naked as newborns, intertwined like two tightly knotted ropes, would know what had happened. At the time, Severus Snape had been dumbfounded. By the time he'd come to his senses and tried to seize the woman for questioning, she had vanished without a trace. Severus Snape's first thought was that it was a trap. Whether from the Death Eaters or someone else, it was definitely a trap. The Death Eaters were unlikely, which meant it was most likely Potter and that black mutt. He'd been cautious and vigilant 4 days, even discreetly questioning the landlord of the leaky cauldron, but he hadn't learned anything concrete. Only that he'd left the pub with a blonde woman, after several weeks with neither the Death Eaters nor the Order making any move, and no one mentioning the incident, coupled with the demands of his new role as a double agent. Severus Snape had put the matter behind him, yet today someone was informing him he had a son. Impossible, it had to be a trap. Severus Snape waved his hand, reducing the letter to dust. After incinerating it until not even ashes remained, he raised his wand, ready for a fight. He would confront this Alia now. Whatever her scheme, she wouldn't succeed. However, just as Severus Snape was about to step out the door, a phoenix cry erupted from the fireplace, sending shivers down his spine. Dumbledore was summoning him. He gritted his teeth, cursed, "Damn it," and rushed to the fireplace. It was a message from Dumbledore. He'd learned from certain sources that there were individuals within the Order of the Phoenix and the Ministry who were secretly sitting with Voldemort. He needed Severus Snape to investigate as soon as possible. Chapter 5. As Alia's due date drew closer, she began handing over her work and applying for maternity leave. The doctor said the baby was rather large and might arrive early, advising her to be prepared. Alia planned to be admitted to the hospital the following week. The hospital wouldn't normally grant her a bed, as it was impractical for a healthy pregnant woman to be admitted a week early. However, Alia's father, Mr. Dashwood, pulled some strings. Considering her finances and the child's future, Alia thought of her father in London. Although they hadn't seen each other for over 3 years, they still exchanged Christmas gifts every year. After she turned 10, Alia received a birthday gift from her father every year. often earrings, necklaces, or designer bags. This was likely because Alia always sent him a birthday gift. This year, she mailed him a box of homemade chocolates, and Mr. Dashwood replied that they were delicious. Learning that his daughter was in London, he said she could visit him. Alia decided to schedule this visit for Friday afternoon, as Mr. Dashwood reserved his weekends for his family. On Friday afternoon, Mr. Dashwood's expression upon seeing Alia's large belly made her and Susan laugh for a whole week. To his eldest daughter, who had gotten pregnant so eagerly just after coming of age, Mr. Dashwood said only one thing: "Alia, I thought you would plan your life better." He then signed a check that would ensure Alia and the child could live comfortably for over a year. Took a long look at Alia's slightly swollen face due to pregnancy, said goodbye, and got into his Lincoln. Driving away, Alia understood the look in his eyes. Mr. Dashwood didn't want to see her again. The father-daughter bond she had carefully maintained for over a decade, and the admiration Mr. Dashwood had gradually developed for her, had completely vanished after she had a child out of wedlock. The £8,000 check was Mr. Dashwood's final gift to his daughter as a father. Alia arrived at her father's company at 5 p.m. By 6 p.m., before the bank closed, she had successfully cashed the check. Walking home calmly, she even stopped by the supermarket to pick up a box of cheese for her landlady downstairs. After a pleasant dinner and conversation with Susan, she returned to her room. Kicking off her shoes, she leaned against the bed, staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, not even daring to blink. Tiny droplets of water seemed to shimmer on her long, curled lashes under the lamplight. She sat there for a long time, until Susan's snoring from the living room sofa made her realize that 3 hours had passed. After successfully completing her leave application, Alia was admitted to the hospital. After hinting to her attending physician about her unusual relationship with the Dashwood family, her hospitalization request was quickly approved. Alia knew that Mr. Dashwood's firm handled the hospital's legal work. Even though she might not see her nominal father again, her last name was still Dashwood, wasn't it? Her only hope now was the child in her womb. After successfully completing her leave application, Alia was admitted to the hospital. After hinting to her attending physician about her unusual relationship with the Dashwood family, her hospitalization request was quickly approved. Alia knew that Mr. Dashwood's firm handled the hospital's legal work. Even though she might not see her nominal father again, her last name was still Dashwood, wasn't it? Her only hope now was the child in her womb. After successfully completing her leave application, Alia was admitted to the hospital. After hinting to her attending physician about her unusual relationship with the Dashwood family, her hospitalization request was quickly approved. Alia knew that Mr. Dashwood's firm handled the hospital's legal work. Even though she might not see her nominal father again, her last name was still Dashwood, wasn't it? Her only hope now was the child in her womb. Severus Snape quickly turned to face the wall. Even though no one here could see him, he blushed at the sight, facing the wall. He listened to the occasional humming sounds of the baby suckling, and the woman's loving words to the infant. After a while, Severus Snape heard the woman softly singing a lullaby, the kind all mothers sing. Snape knew that a long time ago, in the deepest recesses of his memory, a woman had sung the same song to him. Severus Snape quickly turned to face the wall. Even though no one here could see him, he blushed at the sight, facing the wall. He listened to the occasional humming sounds of the baby suckling, and the woman's loving words to the infant. After a while, Severus Snape heard the woman softly singing a lullaby, the kind all mothers sing. Snape knew that a long time ago, in the deepest recesses of his memory, a woman had sung the same song to him. Before coming, Severus Snape had assumed this was a trap. He had been prepared for a fight. After following the address on the letter, a thin-faced, shrewd-looking Muggle woman, supposedly the landlady, told him that Alia had gone to the hospital to give birth. Severus Snape was surprised to learn it was a Muggle hospital. Then, cautiously arriving at this hospital full of smelly Muggles, he saw a newborn wizard less than a week old, and his mother. Standing before the crib, Snape was at a loss. This was completely different from what he had planned. He thought it was a trap or a prank, but it was real. There really was a little wizard, only the size of his 2 hands, carrying his bloodline. He remembered that the child's existence was an accident. Before coming, Severus Snape had assumed this was a trap. He had been prepared for a fight. After following the address on the letter, a thin-faced, shrewd-looking Muggle woman, supposedly the landlady, told him that Alia had gone to the hospital to give birth. Severus Snape was surprised to learn it was a Muggle hospital. Then, cautiously arriving at this hospital full of smelly Muggles, he saw a newborn wizard, less than a week old, and his mother. Standing before the crib, Snape was at a loss. This was completely different from what he had planned. He thought it was a trap or a prank, but it was real. There really was a little wizard, only the size of his 2 hands, carrying his bloodline. He remembered that the child's existence was an accident. He hadn't expected that the woman he had once shared a night with was actually pregnant, and even less that she had actually given birth. A small undetectable legitimacy spell, even to the woman herself, reassured Snape. It turned out this child was indeed just an accident. "Darling, has Andrew's father replied?" Snape heard the Muggle ask. "Oh no, I'd prefer he didn't care, thinking about it now. It was a bit impulsive, but, well, I've done what I should. I should be able to give Andrew an explanation. Andrew is mine alone." "A father can come along any time, can't he?" the woman named Alia replied, blinking her large eyes. Then the Muggle and the woman burst into laughter. He hadn't expected that the woman he had once shared a night with was actually pregnant, and even less that she had actually given birth. A small undetectable legitimacy spell, even to the woman herself, reassured Snape. It turned out this child was indeed just an accident. "Darling, has Andrew's father replied?" Snape heard the Muggle ask. "Oh no, I'd prefer he didn't care, thinking about it now. It was a bit impulsive, but, well, I've done what I should. I should be able to give Andrew an explanation. Andrew is mine alone." "A father can come along any time, can't he?" the woman named Alia replied, blinking her large eyes. Then the Muggle and the woman burst into laughter. What to do? Back in the Hot's Pole dungeons, he leaned against the wall, frowning in thought. Should he take the child? The thought of his child being left with a strange woman made him uneasy. What if the woman had ulterior motives? Even if the woman was safe, what if someone found out about this and used the child to threaten him? After much deliberation, Snape still felt that keeping the child under his own watch was a good idea. He could find a completely safe and reliable wizarding family to raise him. After all, little wizards were so precious. Weren't they? Surely many families would be willing to treat him well. Snape mentally sifted through suitable wizards. Slytherins were definitely out of the question. As far as he knew, many prominent Slytherin families, for the sake of pure bloodlines, wouldn't even acknowledge illegitimate children, let alone a child of unknown origins. Gryffindors wouldn't do either. They were too reckless. He didn't want to see his child grow up like that Potter riffraff. What to do? Back in the Hot's Pole dungeons, he leaned against the wall, frowning in thought. Should he take the child? The thought of his child being left with a strange woman made him uneasy. What if the woman had ulterior motives? Even if the woman was safe, what if someone found out about this and used the child to threaten him? After much deliberation, Snape still felt that keeping the child under his own watch was a good idea. He could find a completely safe and reliable wizarding family to raise him. After all, little wizards were so precious. Weren't they? Surely many families would be willing to treat him well. Snape mentally sifted through suitable wizards. Slytherins were definitely out of the question. As far as he knew, many prominent Slytherin families, for the sake of pure bloodlines, wouldn't even acknowledge illegitimate children, let alone a child of unknown origins. Gryffindors wouldn't do either. They were too reckless. He didn't want to see his child grow up like that Potter riffraff. 2 days later, a gray money bag, without any markings, appeared out of thin air in Andrew's cradle. It happened while Alia was in the bathroom for less than 2 minutes. She opened it in astonishment and found it filled with gold coins, gleaming gold coins. Quickly, like a thief, she hid in the bathroom and counted them for a long time. There were over 3,000 at the bottom of the money bag. Alia found a small note that read, "For Andrew Snape." As soon as Alia finished reading the note, it spontaneously combusted. Panicked, she quickly threw the ashes to the floor and backed away. She watched as the ashes slowly dissipated, vanished into the air as if they had never existed. If it weren't for the pile of gold coins on the floor, and the palm-sized money bag that had held such a large volume of coins, Alia would have thought it was a hallucination. 2 days later, a gray money bag, without any markings, appeared out of thin air in Andrew's cradle. It happened while Alia was in the bathroom for less than 2 minutes. She opened it in astonishment and found it filled with gold coins, gleaming gold coins. Quickly, like a thief, she hid in the bathroom and counted them for a long time. There were over 3,000 at the bottom of the money bag. Alia found a small note that read, "For Andrew Snape." As soon as Alia finished reading the note, it spontaneously combusted. Panicked, she quickly threw the ashes to the floor and backed away. She watched as the ashes slowly dissipated, vanished into the air as if they had never existed. If it weren't for the pile of gold coins on the floor, and the palm-sized money bag that had held such a large volume of coins, Alia would have thought it was a hallucination.